Frederick and Catherine. Once upon a time, there lived a man named Frederick and a woman named Catherine, who had been twisened in marriage and dwelt together as many young couples do, with hopes for a simple life of labor, meals, and shared company. Frederick was a plain, earnest man, while Catherine, though kind at heart, often let her thoughts wander in ways that led to strange doings. One morning, Frederick spoke. "Wife, I go now to plow the field. When I return weary with hunger, I would have a roast set before me and a fresh draught for my thirst." Catherine answered briskly, "Go your way, Frederick, and trust me. You shall have all ready at the hour of your return." So near noon, she fetched down a fat sausage that hung in the chimney, laid it in the frying pan with a good piece of butter, and set it upon the fire. The butter hissed, the sausage sputtered, and Catherine stood by with the pan handle in her hand, musing to herself how clever she was to provide so fine a meal. Yet her thoughts strayed, as they often did. "It would be wise," said she within, "while the sausage cooks, to go into the cellar and draw a jug of beer." Thus she left the pan safe upon the fire, took a can in her hand, and went below. The beer foamed and ran merrily into the vessel. But while it filled, she thought suddenly, "Good heavens, the dog is not fastened. He may snatch the sausage from the pan." With that, she hastened up the steps. But alas, the Spitz had already seized the sausage and was dragging it proudly over the floor. Catherine flew after it, out through the yard and into the field. Yet the dog was swift and frisked away, the sausage bumping over the furrows. She chased long, until weariness overcame her. "What is gone, sighed Catherine at last, and she turned back, walking more slowly, cooling her hot face. But in the cellar, the beer still ran, for she had not closed the tap. The can overflowed, the stream poured upon the floor, and by the time she returned, the whole cask was drained. Catherine wrung her hands. "Dear me, what will Frederick say? How shall I hide the misfortune?" She pondered, and then remembered a sack of fine wheat flour lying in the garret. "If I strew the flour over the wet floor," she thought, "no one will see the beer. And what is saved in time is saved for need." Up she climbed, dragged down the heavy sack, and poured the whole upon the cellar floor, spilling also what remained of the beer jug. White meal and golden liquid mingled, and Catherine, wiping her brow, declared, "How clean and wholesome it looks now." At midday, Frederick came home. "Wife, what hast thou for me?" "Ah, Freddie," she cried, "a sausage was frying for you, but while I drew the beer, the dog ran off with it. While I chased the dog, the beer ran out, and when I dried the beer with the flour, I overturned the jug. But be easy, the cellar is quite dry again." Frederick shook his head. Kate, Kate, thou shouldst not have done that. To lose the sausage, let the beer run, and waste all the flour besides." "Indeed, Frederick," said she, "I knew not that it was wrong. You should have told me so." From that day, Frederick thought, "My wife must be watched, else all will go amiss." Now he had laid by many thalers, which he changed into gold coins. He showed them to Catherine and said, "See, here are yellow counters for games. I will hide them in a pot under the cow's manger. But mind, you do not meddle with them, or it will be ill for you." "Oh, no, Frederick," said she, "I will not touch them." But no sooner had he gone than some peddlers came into the village with earthen bowls and pots. Catherine longed for the bright wares, but had no money. "If you care for yellow counters," said she, "I can buy of you." "Yellow counters? Show them us," said the peddlers. "I may not," she replied. "Go to the stable, dig under the cow's manger, and you shall find them." So the rogues dug and found the gold. They seized it and ran off, leaving their pots behind. Catherine, pleased with her bargain, set all the bowls about the house. Yet, thinking she had more than enough already, she knocked the bottoms out and hung them like ornaments on the fence, where they shone in the sun. When Frederick came home and saw the new display, he asked, "What have you done, Catherine?" "I bought these with the counters from under the manger. The peddlers dug them up themselves." Frederick groaned. "Wife, those were not counters, but our purest gold. All our wealth is gone." "Ah, Frederick," said she, "I did not know. You should have warned me." Catherine then proposed they chase the thieves to win back their treasure. Frederick agreed, and they set off, Catherine carrying butter and cheeses for food. But as they went over a hill, she pitied the deep cart ruts in the road. "The poor earth is sorely hurt," she murmured. And in her compassion, she smeared the ruts with her butter. Meanwhile, her cheeses rolled from her pocket down the hill. Thinking each had gone to call the other back, she sent more after them until all were lost. When she rejoined Frederick with only dry bread, he cried, "Kate, you should not have smeared the road with butter, nor sent the cheeses tumbling." "Indeed, you should have told me," said she. Later, Frederick asked if she had locked the house. Catherine had not. She returned, unhinged the lower half of the door, and carried it on her back, thinking thus the house would be safe. Along with it, she bore dried pears and vinegar. Meeting Frederick again, she said cheerfully, "Here is the door. Now you can guard the house yourself." "Oh, wise wife," sighed Frederick. Night overtook them, and they climbed a tree to rest. Below, the thieves lit a fire to divide their loot. Frederick gathered stones to throw. But Catherine, pressed by the weight of the door, began dropping first the pears, then the vinegar, then at last the very door. The thieves, thinking the devil himself was descending, fled in terror, leaving behind all the stolen gold. Thus, Frederick and Catherine returned home enriched. Yet Catherine, still determined to be useful, went to cut corn. But instead of reaping, she ate, then slept, and in her drowsy dreaming cut her very clothes to rags. Half naked, she awoke, bewildered, and ran to Frederick's window, crying, "Frederick, is Catherine within?" "Yes," answered he. "She must be at home and asleep." "'Tis well," said she. "Then surely I am there already." And off she ran again. So the tale of Frederick and Catherine runs, a story of a husband who toils and a wife who means well, yet turns all upside down. And though Frederick often lamented, he bore with her folly, for such was his lot, and such was Catherine. All kinds of fur. Allerleirauh. There was once, on a time, a king who had a wife with golden hair, and she was so beautiful that her equal was not to be found on earth. It came to pass that she lay ill, and as she felt that she must soon die, she called the king and said, "If thou wishest to marry again after my death, take no one who is not quite as beautiful as I am, and who has not just such golden hair as I have. This thou must promise me." And after the king had promised her this, she closed her eyes and died. For a long time the king could not be comforted, and had no thought of taking another wife. At length his counselors said, "There is no help for it. The king must marry again, that we may have a queen." And now messengers were sent about far and wide to seek a bride who equaled the late queen in beauty. In the whole world, however, none was to be found, and even if an had been found, still there would have been no one who had such golden hair. So the messengers came home as they went. Now the king had a daughter who was just as beautiful as her dead mother, and had the same golden hair. When she was grown up, the king looked at her one day and saw that in every respect she was like his late wife, and suddenly felt a violent love for her. Then he spake to his counselors, "I will marry my daughter, for she is the counterpart of my late wife. Otherwise I can find no bride who resembles her." When the counselors heard that, they were shocked and said, "God has forbidden a father to marry his daughter. No good can come from such a crime, and the kingdom will be involved in the ruin." The daughter was still more shocked when she became aware of her father's resolution, but hoped to turn him from his design. Then she said to him, "Before I fulfill your wish, I must have 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silvery as the moon, and one as bright as the stars. Besides this, I wish for a mantle of 1,000 different kinds of fur and hair joined together, and one of every kind of animal in your kingdom must give a piece of his skin for it. But she thought, to get that will be quite impossible, and thus I shall divert my father from his wicked intentions. The king, however, did not give it up, and the cleverest maidens in his kingdom had to weave the 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silvery as the moon, and one as bright as the stars. And his huntsman had to catch one of every kind of animal in the whole of his kingdom, and take from it a piece of its skin. And out of these was made a mantle of 1,000 different kinds of fur. At length, when all was ready, the king caused the mantle to be brought, spread it out before her, and said, "The wedding shall be tomorrow." When, therefore, the king's daughter saw that there was no longer any hope of turning her father's heart, she resolved to run away from him. In the night, whilst everyone was asleep, she got up and took 3 different things from her treasures: a golden ring, a golden spinning wheel, and a golden reel. The 3 dresses of the sun, moon, and stars she put into a nutshell, put on her mantle of all kinds of fur, and blackened her face and hands with soot. Then she commended herself to God, and went away, and walked the whole night until she reached a great forest. And as she was tired, she got into a hollow tree and fell asleep. The sun rose, and she slept on, and she was still sleeping when it was full day. Then it so happened that the king to whom this forest belonged was hunting in it. When his dogs came to the tree, they sniffed and ran barking round about it. The king said to the huntsman, "Just see what kind of wild beast has hidden itself in there." The huntsman obeyed his order, and when they came back, they said, "A wondrous beast is lying in the hollow tree. We have never before seen one like it. Its skin is fur of 1,000 different kinds, but it is lying asleep." Said the king, "See if you can catch it alive, and then fasten it to the carriage, and we will take it with us." When the huntsman laid hold of the maiden, she awoke full of terror, and cried to them, "I am a poor child, deserted by father and mother. Have pity on me, and take me with you." Then said they, "Allerleirauh, thou wilt be useful in the kitchen. Come with us, and thou canst sweep up the ashes." So they put her in the carriage, and took her home to the royal palace. There they pointed out to her a closet under the stairs, where no daylight entered, and said, "Hairy animal, there canst thou live and sleep." Then she was sent into the kitchen, and there she carried wood and water, swept the hearth, plucked the fowls, picked the vegetables, raked the ashes, and did all the dirty work. Allerleirauh lived there for a long time in great wretchedness. Alas, fair princess, what is to become of thee now? It happened, however, that one day a feast was held in the palace, and she said to the cook, "May I go upstairs for a while and look on? I will place myself outside the door." The cook answered, "Yes, go, but you must be back here in half an hour to sweep the hearth." Then she took her oil lamp, went into her den, put off her fur dress, and washed the soot off her face and hands, so that her full beauty once more came to light. And she opened the nut, and took out her dress, which shone like the sun. And when she had done that, she went up to the festival, and every one made way for her, for no one knew her, and thought no otherwise than that she was a king's daughter. The king came to meet her, gave his hand to her, and danced with her, and thought in his heart, "My eyes have never yet seen anyone so beautiful." When the dance was over, she curtsied, and when the king looked round again, she had vanished, and none knew whither. The guards who stood outside the palace were called and questioned, but no one had seen her. She had, however, run into her little den, had quickly taken off her dress, made her face and hands black again, put on the fur mantle, and again was Allerleirauh. And now, when she went into the kitchen and was about to get to her work and sweep up the ashes, the cook said, "Leave that alone till morning, and make me the soup for the king. I too will go upstairs a while and take a look, but let no hairs fall in, or in future thou shalt have nothing to eat." So the cook went away, and Allerleirauh made the soup for the king, and made bread soup, and the best she could. And when it was ready, she fetched her golden ring from her little den, and put it in the bowl in which the soup was served. When the dancing was over, the king had his soup brought and ate it, and he liked it so much that it seemed to him he had never tasted better. But when he came to the bottom of the bowl, he saw a golden ring lying, and could not conceive how it could have got there. Then he ordered the cook to appear before him. The cook was terrified when he heard the order, and said to Allerleirauh, "Thou hast certainly let a hair fall into the soup, and if thou hast, thou shalt be beaten for it." When he came before the king, the latter asked who had made the soup. The cook replied, "I made it." But the king said, "That is not true, for it was much better than usual, and cooked differently." He answered, "I must acknowledge that I did not make it. It was made by the rough animal." The king said, "Go and bid it come up here." When Allerleirauh came, the king said, "Who art thou?" "I am a poor girl who no longer has any father or mother. He asked further, "Of what use art thou in my palace?" She answered, "I am good for nothing but to have boots thrown at my head." He continued, "Where didst thou get the ring which was in the soup?" She answered, "I know nothing about the ring." So the king could learn nothing, and had to send her away again. After a while, there was another festival. And then, as before, Allerleirauh begged the cook for leave to go and look on. He answered, "Yes, but come back again in half an hour, and make the king the bread soup, which he so much likes." Then she ran into her den, washed herself quickly, and took out of the nut the dress which was as silvery as the moon, and put it on. Then she went up, and was like a princess, and the king stepped forward to meet her, and rejoiced to see her once more. And as the dance was just beginning, they danced it together. But when it was ended, she again disappeared so quickly that the king could not observe where she went. She, however, sprang into her den, and once more made herself a hairy animal, and went into the kitchen to prepare the bread soup. When the cook had gone upstairs, she fetched the little golden spinning wheel, and put it in the bowl so that the soup covered it. Then it was taken to the king, who ate it, and liked it as much as before, and had the cook brought, who this time likewise was forced to confess that Allerleirauh had prepared the soup. Allerleirauh again came before the king, but she answered that she was good for nothing else but to have boots thrown at her head, and that she knew nothing at all about the little golden spinning wheel. When, for the third time, the king held a festival, all happened just as it had done before. The cook said, "Faith, rough skin, thou art a witch, and always puttest something in the soup which makes it so good that the king likes it better than that which I cook." But as she begged so hard, he let her go up at the appointed time. And now she put on the dress which shone like the stars, and thus entered the hall. Again the king danced with the beautiful maiden, and thought that she never yet had been so beautiful. And whilst she was dancing, he contrived, without her noticing it, to slip a golden ring on her finger. And he had given orders that the dance should last a very long time. When it was ended, he wanted to hold her fast by her hands, but she tore herself loose and sprang away so quickly through the crowd that she vanished from his sight. She ran as fast as she could into her den beneath the stairs, but as she had been too long, and had stayed more than half an hour, she could not take off her pretty dress, but only threw over it her fur mantle. And in her haste, she did not make herself quite black, but one finger remained white. Then Allerleirauh ran into the kitchen and cooked the bread soup for the king, and as the cook was away, put her golden reel into it. When the king found the reel at the bottom of it, he caused Allerleirauh to be summoned, and then he espied the white finger, and saw the ring which he had put on it during the dance. Then he grasped her by the hand and held her fast. And when she wanted to release herself and run away, her mantle of fur opened a little, and the star dress shone forth. The king clutched the mantle and tore it off. Then her golden hair shone forth, and she stood there in full splendor and could no longer hide herself. And when she had washed the soot and ashes from her face, she was more beautiful than anyone who had ever been seen on earth. But the king said, "Thou art my dear bride, and we will never more part from each other." Thereupon the marriage was solemnized, and they lived happily until their death. The Rabbit's Bride. There was once a woman, a widow, who lived with her only daughter in a garden that was famed throughout the village. The garden was rich and green, full of strong cabbages with wide, dark leaves that shone when the morning dew lay upon them. It was the widow's pride and her daughter's delight, for from these cabbages they cooked their soups, and from these cabbages they sold at market enough to keep hunger from their door. But one day there came a rabbit, quick and clever, with long ears and bright eyes, who found his way among the cabbages. He nibbled here and he nibbled there until the leaves were torn and the stalks stood bare. The woman wrung her hands in sorrow and cried to her daughter, "Go, child, go into the garden and drive out the rabbit, else we shall have nothing left." So the maiden went, and she called out, "Shoo, shoo, do not eat up all our cabbages, little rabbit." But the rabbit sat up on his haunches, and his whiskers twitched as he spoke in a soft, coaxing voice. "Come, fair maiden, come with me. Sit upon my tail, and I will carry you away to my rabbit hutch." Yet the maiden shook her head, for she was afraid, and she ran back to her mother. The very next day, back came the rabbit. Again he ate and gnawed and feasted on the green leaves, and again the poor woman said, "Child, go into the garden and drive him away, else he will leave us nothing." So the maiden went, and she cried, "Shoo, shoo, do not eat up all our cabbages, little rabbit." But once more the rabbit answered, "Come, fair maiden, come with me. Sit upon my tail, and I will carry you away to my rabbit hutch." And once more the maiden refused and ran quickly into the house. But rabbits are creatures of stubborn will, and on the third day the same rabbit came again. Bold as ever, he hopped through the rows, tore at the hearts of the cabbages, and cared nothing for the poor woman's toil. So again the mother said, "Go, daughter, into the garden and chase away that wicked rabbit. The maiden went, and as she stood among the ruined stalks, she called again, "Shoo, shoo, do not eat up all our cabbages, little rabbit." The rabbit rose tall and said once more with gleaming eyes, "Come, maiden, come with me. Sit upon my tail, and I will carry you away to my rabbit hutch." This time, weary and frightened, the girl did as he bade. She seated herself upon the soft fur of his tail, and the rabbit bounded away with her, swift as the wind, through field and hedge and wood, until they came to his dwelling, deep and hidden. "Now," said the rabbit, "set the fire and cook bran and cabbage, for soon I will bid the wedding guests." The maiden's heart was heavy, but she did as she was told. She stirred the bran, and she cut the cabbage, though her tears fell into the pot. Not long after, the guests began to arrive. Would you know who they were? All the hares of the forest, great and small, came skipping and thumping, their ears tall and their eyes red as berries. Then came the crow, black and solemn, who was to be the parson to marry them, and the fox, sly and smooth, came to be the clerk and keep the book. The altar was set beneath the arch of a rainbow, bright and trembling above the hut. Yet the maiden was not merry. She sat by the fire, her eyes red with weeping, for she was lonely and far from her mother. "Get up, get up," cried the rabbit. "The wedding folk are waiting, and all are glad." But the bride only wept and said not a word. The rabbit went out, then soon returned again. "Get up, get up, the wedding folk are waiting." But still she wept and said nothing. Then, while the rabbit was away, she took straw and fashioned a figure. She dressed it in her own clothes, gave it her kerchief, and with red paint she made it a mouth. She set it by the fire to watch the pot of bran. And then, as quickly as her feet would carry her, she fled from the hutch and found her way back to her mother's house. When the rabbit came once more, he cried again, "Get up! Get up! The wedding folk are waiting." He stepped to the figure, and he struck it on the head, thinking to rouse it. But the figure tumbled down. Then the rabbit was struck with dread. He believed his bride was dead, slain before the wedding feast. So he went away heavy in heart, and all the hares and beasts that had gathered melted into the forest, and the rainbow faded from the sky. And the maiden sat once more with her mother in the little house beside the ruined garden. And though the cabbages never grew as fine again, she was safe, and she never followed a rabbit more. The thief and his master. There once lived a man named Hans, who was poor in wealth, but rich in worries. He had but one son, and like many fathers before him, he desired to see the boy established in a trade, so that he might not wander idle through the world. But Hans was uncertain which trade would bring the greatest fortune. In his trouble, he turned, as was common in those days, to the church. He entered quietly, bent his knees before the altar, and prayed earnestly to the Lord God to grant him wisdom. "Show me, O Lord," said Hans, "what path shall be most prosperous for my son, that he may not starve, but live in honor." Now, as he prayed, the clerk, who had hidden himself behind the altar, thinking to make sport, whispered in a sharp voice, "Thieving, thieving." Hans, trembling, believed it to be the answer of heaven itself. He rose from the stone floor, crossed himself, and went home heavy of heart, yet resolved. He said to his son, "My child, the Lord has spoken. You are to learn the craft of thieving, for so it is ordained." The boy, though surprised, trusted his father, and so together they set out to seek a master in so dark an art. They wandered long upon lonely roads, through fields and villages, until at last they came to a vast forest. In the shadow of its trees, they spied a small, crooked house. Within dwelt an old woman, wrinkled and wise, who listened to their tale. "If you seek a teacher," said she, "you have come to the right place. My own son is a master thief, skilled beyond all others. He can teach the lad well." Hans, half fearful and half hopeful, spoke with the master thief. "Can you truly teach him all there is to know?" The man smiled, his eyes gleaming. "I can teach him as none else can. But hear the bargain. Return after a year. If you can recognize your son, you shall pay me nothing. If you fail, then you must give me 200 thalers. Hans, bound by the strange command he had received in church, agreed and went home. The boy remained in the forest and learned not only the art of stealing, but witchcraft, cunning transformations, and secrets of shape and shadow. Under the master's care, he grew swift as a fox, watchful as an owl, and sly as a serpent. The year passed swiftly, and Hans, who had counted each day, grew anxious, for he knew not how he might recognize his son again, should magic conceal him. One day, as he walked sorrowful along the road, he met a dwarf, small of stature, but sharp of eye. The little man asked, "Hans, why is your brow so furrowed? And why do you sigh, as though the wind bore all your burdens?" Hans told him of the bargain, and how he feared to lose both his son and his money. The dwarf said, "Take heart. Carry with you a basket of black bread. When you stand beneath the chimney of the master's house, look to the crossbeam. There you will see a basket, and from it a little bird will peep. That bird is none other than your son." Hans followed the counsel. He crept beneath the chimney, set the basket of bread upon the floor, and lo, from the hanging basket, a small bird hopped forth to peck at the crumbs. "Hollow, my son, art thou here?" cried Hans. The bird fluttered with joy, and in a moment the youth stood before him once more. The master thief, who had trusted his spells, grew pale. "The devil must have aided you. No man could have known him otherwise." But Hans clasped his son's hand, saying, "Come, let us go home." And the two set out together. Yet the boy had not learned his arts in vain. As they walked, a grand carriage came rolling by upon the road. "Father," said the youth, "I shall turn into a greyhound. Sell me to the gentleman in the carriage, and you will gain silver. Fear not, for I will return." At once he leapt, and where the boy had stood, a sleek greyhound ran beside Hans. The gentleman, seeing the fine beast, called out, "Good man, will you sell me your dog?" Hans agreed, asking 30 thalers. The price was high, but the gentleman, admiring the dog, paid it. Yet scarcely had the carriage gone a short distance when the hound sprang out of the window and returned to his father, resuming his true shape. The next day was a fair in the town nearby. "Now, father," said the youth, "I will become a splendid horse. Sell me if you can, but mark this well. Remove the bridle, or I cannot return to myself." So saying, he transformed into a horse so strong and beautiful that all eyes at the fair turned toward it. Hans led the horse through the crowd, and who should come but the very master thief himself? He gave 100 thalers and claimed the horse, but Hans, in his forgetfulness, left the bridle on its head. The master laughed, drove the horse to his own house, and shut it in the stable. Now, when the maid came across the threshold, the horse spoke in a low voice. "Take off my bridle. Take it off quickly." The maid, astonished, said, "Canst thou speak?" But her heart was moved, and she loosed the bridle. At once the horse vanished, and in its place a sparrow fluttered up and out into the open air. The master, skilled in wicked arts, turned likewise into a sparrow and gave chase. Higher and higher they flew, till at last they cast lots in the wind. Twice the master lost, and in anger changed himself into a fish, diving into the river. But the youth, too, became a fish, swift as silver. And again, the master lost. Then the master turned into a cock, crowing loud upon the bank. But the youth, quick of wit, became a fox and leapt upon him. With sharp teeth, he bit off the cock's head, and thus the master thief perished, and has remained dead to this very day. Hans and his son returned home safely, richer in coin and wiser in craft. And though men whispered of the strange things the boy had learned, Hans only said, "What is taught may be turned to good, if a man has wit enough." Jorinda and Joringela. There once stood, in the heart of a vast and ancient forest, a castle of stone, so weathered and silent that travelers spoke of it only in whispers. Its high walls were half hidden by ivy and shadow, and its windows stared out like empty eyes. In this castle dwelt an old woman, feared by all who knew of her. She was no ordinary woman, but a witch who lived alone, apart from mankind, wrapped in secrets and in sorcery. By day, she slipped out of her true form and became something else. Sometimes a prowling black cat whose eyes gleamed like coals. Sometimes a screech owl whose cry curdled the blood. Yet when evening fell and the sun dipped behind the trees, she took again the shape of a bent and wrinkled crone. Her powers were dreadful. With murmured words, she could draw wild beasts and birds from the forest, luring them to her like moths to a flame. Then she would kill them, boiling some, roasting others, until her grim halls reeked of smoke and flesh. But her most cruel enchantment was laid upon men. Whoever strayed within 100 paces of her castle was caught fast, as if bound in chains. They could not stir a step forward or back until she willed it. And if it happened to be a maiden, innocent and young, the witch's cruelty was sharper still. The maiden was struck silent, changed in an instant into a bird with trembling wings. Into a wicker cage, the witch thrust her, locking her away in a chamber filled with sorrowful song. It was said that 7,000 cages, each holding a rare bird, lined the stone rooms of that castle. 7,000 stolen voices, imprisoned by wickedness. Now, there lived in a nearby village a maiden named Jorinda, fairer and gentler than all the rest. Her eyes were bright as spring water, her hair soft as dusk, and her heart pure as dawn. With her was a young man named Joringela, strong and handsome, who had pledged his life to her. They had promised to marry, though the days of their betrothal had not yet run their course. Their joy lay not in gold or feasts, but in walking side by side, speaking softly, dreaming of the days to come. One evening, when the light was golden, and the turtle doves were murmuring their plaintive songs among the birch trees, the lovers wandered into the forest. "Be careful, my Jorinda," Joringel whispered, casting anxious glances among the shadows. "Do not go too near the castle, for evil dwells within its stones. Yet love makes the heart heedless, and sorrow pressed upon them that night as if a cloud had settled over their joy." Jorinda sat in a shaft of sunlight, her eyes brimming with tears, and Joringel, too, felt a weight upon his spirit. They were sorrowful, as though parted already by death. As they wandered, they lost their way. The sun dipped lower, half hidden behind the mountain. Joringel's gaze fell through the thicket, and there, too near for comfort, rose the grim walls of the castle. Fear seized him. His limbs trembled. At that moment, Jorinda lifted her voice in a song. "My little bird with the necklace red sings sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. He sings that the dove must soon be dead, sings sorrow, soar, jug, jug, jug." Her voice faltered. Joringel turned to her, but she was gone. In her place, a nightingale fluttered, crying, "Jug, jug, jug." Around her circled a screech owl with eyes like burning embers, who thrice wheeled about and thrice shrieked, "To-hoo, to-hoo, to-hoo." Joringel was stricken as if turned to stone. He could not speak, nor cry, nor move a finger. Helpless he stood, while the sun sank and shadows deepened. The owl vanished into the thicket, and out from it crept the witch herself. Bent and bony, her skin yellow as old parchment, her hooked nose nearly meeting her chin, her red eyes glowing like coals in the dark. Muttering, she seized the nightingale in her claw-like hand and carried it away. Joringel still stood, rooted to the spot, unable to stir. At last the witch returned, her voice hollow as a grave when she spoke. "Hail, Zachiel. If the moon shines on the cage, then set him loose." And with those words, the spell upon Jorinja broke. Falling to his knees, he begged for his beloved. "Give me back, Jorinda, give her back." But the old woman only cackled, declaring he would never see her again, and vanished into the gloom. Joringel wept bitterly, his cries echoing uselessly through the forest. At length, broken in spirit, he left the place and wandered until he came to a far village. There he kept sheep and lived alone, but his heart was never at rest. Often he stole to the edges of the cursed forest, circling the castle yet never daring too near. His longing for Jorinda was like a wound that would not heal. One night, as he lay upon his pallet, a dream came to him. In the dream, he saw a flower, blood red as a drop of heart's blood, and in its heart shone a pearl larger and lovelier than any jewel on earth. With this flower, he went to the castle, and everything he touched with it was freed from enchantment. By this means, he dreamed, he could recover Jorinda. When morning broke, Joringela rose, filled with hope. He searched the hills and valleys, the meadows and the mountain paths for this wondrous flower. He sought for 9 long days, and on the 9th, just at dawn, he found it blooming in the grass. Its petals glowed crimson, and in the center lay a dewdrop bright as a pearl. Clutching it, he hastened to the castle. This time, though he crossed within 100 paces, no spell bound him. His heart leapt with joy. He touched the great door with the flower, and it swung open of its own accord. Through the courtyard he walked, his ears straining for the sound of the captive birds. At last he heard them, 1,000 sorrowful voices fluttering and crying in their cages. He followed the sound and came to a chamber where the witch was feeding her captives. 7,000 cages lined the walls, each holding a trembling bird. When she beheld Joringela, she flew into a rage, spitting poison and curses. Yet she could not come within 2 paces of him, for the flower's power drove her back. He ignored her fury and searched the cages, but there were hundreds of nightingales. How should he know which was his beloved? Just then, he saw the crone lift a cage and creep toward the door, muttering to herself. Swiftly, Joringela leapt forward, touched the cage with the red flower, and also touched the witch. In that moment, her power crumbled. She could bewitch no one ever again. The cage broke open, and from it stepped Jorinda, no longer a bird, but a maiden as fair and radiant as before. With tears of joy, she flung her arms around Joringela's neck, and thus, through courage, faith, and love stronger than sorcery, they were united once more. The 3 children of fortune. Once there was an old man who had grown weary with age, and when he felt his time was short, he called his 3 sons to his side. His voice was frail, but his words carried weight, for they were his last counsel. "My sons," said he, "I have no chest of silver to divide among you, no land, no house, no treasures. All that I can leave are 3 small things, and though they may seem of little worth, in them lies your fortune if you use them wisely. Take them to places where no one has yet seen such marvels. And there you will prosper." Then he gave to the eldest a cock, to the second a scythe, and to the third a cat. Soon after, he died, and the brothers prepared themselves for the journey into the wide world. The eldest set out first, carrying the cock. He wandered through towns and villages, but everywhere he went, the creature was already known. In cities, he saw cocks of iron upon steeples, turning with the wind. And in the countryside, he heard their crowing from every farm. People laughed at his pride, for to them the cock was no marvel. And he began to fear that his father's gift was of no use. Yet he did not give up. At length, after long travel, he reached an island where no cock had ever been seen, and the people there lived without knowing the hours of night. They could tell morning from evening, but when darkness fell, if they lay awake, none could say whether dawn was near or far. The young man showed them his bird and said, "Behold this noble creature. See how it bears a crown upon its head like a king, and spurs like a knight upon its feet. Hear how it crows 3 times in the night, at hours that never fail. And when it cries the 3rd time, the sun soon rises. If by day it crows, then mark my words, the weather is about to change." The people marveled greatly. That night they kept awake, listening with delight as the cock crowed at 2, at 4, and at 6. They rejoiced, for the passing hours had never been made so clear. They asked eagerly whether the bird might be bought, and he answered, "Give me as much gold as an ass can carry." They declared it a small price for so wondrous a thing, and paid it willingly. Laden with treasure, the eldest returned home in triumph. The second brother, seeing this, said, "If my brother has grown rich with his cock, why should I not prosper with my scythe?" So he journeyed forth, carrying the shining blade upon his shoulder. In every land he entered, men already had scythes, and no one marveled at his gift. He wandered long without success. At last he came to an island where men knew nothing of scythes. When their fields of grain were ripe, they dragged out cannons and shot at the stalks. The thunder was dreadful. The smoke darkened the sky, and the harvest was ruined. For some balls flew too high, while others broke only the ears and left the stems standing. Much was lost, and the people grew weary of the toil and noise. Then the brother stepped into the field and swung his scythe. Back and forth he moved, and the stalks fell silently in neat rows. The people stood with mouths open and cried, "This is a marvel." They begged him to part with the tool, and he answered, "Give me a horse laden with as much gold as it can carry." They agreed at once and gave him what he asked, so he too returned home with great wealth. Now the youngest wished to try his fortune with the cat. He fared no better on the mainland than his brothers had at first, for cats were everywhere, and so many that newborn kittens were drowned without pity. He wandered far, but hope dwindled. At last, he crossed the sea and came to a kingdom where no man had ever seen such a beast. There the mice held rule, bold and many, running over tables and benches, gnawing at grain, cloth, and wood. And even in the royal palace, they squeaked in every corner. The king himself was plagued and could find no remedy. But when the cat was loosed, she began her chase, swift and silent, and in little time cleared chamber after chamber. The people shouted for joy and begged the king to buy the creature. The king agreed and paid with a mule laden with gold. Thus, the youngest returned home richer than them all. In the palace, the cat lived merrily, and so many mice did she catch that the people could no longer count them. But one day, weary with the chase and parched with thirst, she sat still, lifted her head, and cried, "Mew, mew." At that cry, the king and his courtiers grew pale with fear, for never before had such a sound been heard. They believed a monster was within their walls. They fled from the palace and called council. "Shall we allow such a beast to dwell among us?" said they. "Better to endure the mice, which we have long suffered, than to risk our lives with this creature." So they sent a noble youth to speak with her and ask if she would leave in peace. But the cat, thirstier than before, only cried, "Mew, mew." The youth trembled, thinking she said, "Most certainly not, most certainly not." He brought this answer back to the king, and the counselors declared, "Then she shall be driven out by force." They wheeled out cannons, and the palace was battered until flames leapt from its windows and towers. The cat leapt lightly from a high window and fled unharmed. But the palace fell into ruin. So it was that 3 sons went out into the world with gifts that seemed of little worth, and each returned with wealth beyond measure. Yet while the cock brought order to time, and the scythe brought peace to the harvest, the cat, though she rid the land of mice, filled the king's heart with terror and brought his palace to ashes. And to this day, the tale is told of how small gifts, wisely or fearfully received, may shape the fate of kingdoms. 6 soldiers of fortune. There was once a man who was a jack of all trades. He had served in the war and had been brave and bold. But at the end of it, he was sent about his business with 3 farthings and his discharge. "I am not going to stand this," said he. "Wait till I find the right man to help me, and the king shall give me all the treasures of his kingdom before he has done with me." Then, full of wrath, he went into the forest, and he saw one standing there by 6 trees, which he had rooted up as if they had been stalks of corn. And he said to him, "Will you be my man, and come along with me?" "All right," answered he. "I must just take this bit of wood home to my father and mother." And taking one of the trees, he bound it round the other 5, and putting the faggot on his shoulder, he carried it off. Then, soon coming back, he went along with his leader, who said, "2 such as we can stand against the whole world." And when they had gone on a little while, they came to a huntsman who was kneeling on one knee and taking careful aim with his rifle. "Huntsman," said the leader, "what are you aiming at?" "2 miles from here," answered he. "There sits a fly on the bough of an oak tree. I mean to put a bullet into its left eye." "Oh, come along with me," said the leader. "3 of us together can stand against the world." The huntsman was quite willing to go with him, and so they went on till they came to 7 windmills, whose sails were going round briskly. And yet there was no wind blowing from any quarter, and not a leaf stirred. "Well," said the leader, "I cannot think what ails the windmills, turning without wind." And he went on with his followers about 2 miles farther. And then they came to a man sitting up in a tree, holding one nostril and blowing with the other. "Now then," said the leader, "what are you doing up there?" "2 miles from here," answered he. "There are 7 windmills. I am blowing, and they are going round." "Oh, go with me," cried the leader. "4 of us together can stand against the world." So the blower got down and went with them, and after a time they came to a man standing on one leg, and the other had been taken off and was lying near him. "You seem to have got a handy way of resting yourself," said the leader to the man. "I am a runner," answered he, "and in order to keep myself from going too fast, I have taken off a leg, for when I run with both, I go faster than a bird can fly." "Oh, go with me," cried the leader. "5 of us together may well stand against the world." So he went with them all together, and it was not long before they met a man with a little hat on, and he wore it just over one ear. "Manners, manners," said the leader. "With your hat like that, you look like a jack fool." "Huswa, I dare not put it straight," answered the other. "If I did, there would be such a terrible frost that the very birds would be frozen and fall dead from the sky to the ground." "Oh, come with me," said the leader. "We 6 together may well stand against the whole world." So the 6 went on until they came to a town where the king had caused it to be made known that whoever would run a race with his daughter and win, it might become her husband, but that whoever lost must lose his head into the bargain. And the leader came forward and said one of his men should run for him. Then, said the king, his life too must be put in pledge, and if he fails, his head and yours too must fall. When this was quite settled and agreed upon, the leader called the runner and strapped his second leg onto him. "Now look out," said he, "and take care that we win." It had been agreed that the one who should bring water first from a far distant brook should be accounted winner. Now the king's daughter and the runner each took a pitcher, and they started both at the same time. But in one moment, when the king's daughter had gone but a very little way, the runner was out of sight, for his running was as if the wind rushed by. In a short time, he reached the brook, filled his pitcher full of water, and turned back again. About halfway home, however, he was overcome with weariness, and setting down his pitcher, he lay down on the ground to sleep. But in order to awaken soon again, by not lying too soft, he had taken a horse's skull, which lay near, and placed it under his head for a pillow. In the meanwhile, the king's daughter, who really was a good runner, good enough to beat an ordinary man, had reached the brook and filled her pitcher, and was hastening with it back again, when she saw the runner lying asleep. "The day is mine," said she with much joy, and she emptied his pitcher and hastened on, and now all had been lost but for the huntsman, who was standing on the castle wall, and with his keen eyes saw all that happened. "We must not be outdone by the king's daughter," said he, and he loaded his rifle and took so good an aim that he shot the horse's skull from under the runner's head without doing him any harm. And the runner awoke and jumped up and saw his pitcher standing empty, and the king's daughter far on her way home. But, not losing courage, he ran swiftly to the brook, filled it again with water, and for all that, he got home 10 minutes before the king's daughter. "Look you," said he, "this is the first time I have really stretched my legs. Before it was not worth the name of running." The king was vexed, and his daughter yet more so, that she should be beaten by a discharged common soldier. And they took counsel together how they might rid themselves of him and of his companions at the same time. "I have a plan," said the king. "Do not fear, but that we shall be quit of them forever." Then he went out to the men and bade them to feast and be merry and eat and drink. And he led them into a room which had a floor of iron. and the doors were iron. The windows had iron frames and bolts. In the room was a table set out with costly food. "Now, go in there and make yourselves comfortable," said the king. And when they had gone in, he had the door locked and bolted. Then he called the cook and told him to make a big fire underneath the room, so that the iron floor of it should be red hot. And the cook did so. And the 6 men began to feel the room growing very warm by reason, as they thought at first, of the good dinner. But as the heat grew greater and greater, and they found the doors and windows fastened, they began to think it was an evil plan of the king's to suffocate them. "He shall not succeed, however," said the man with the little hat. "I will bring on a frost that shall make the fire feel ashamed of itself and creep out of the way." So he set his hat straight on his head, and immediately there came such a frost that all the heat passed away, and the food froze in the dishes. After an hour or 2 had passed, and the king thought they must have all perished in the heat, he caused the door to be opened, and went himself to see how they fared. And when the door flew back, there they were, all 6 quite safe and sound. And they said they were quite ready to come out, so that they might warm themselves, for the great cold of that room had caused the food to freeze in the dishes. Full of wrath, the king went to the cook and scolded him and asked why he had not done as he was ordered. "It is hot enough there. You may see for yourself," answered the cook. And the king looked and saw an immense fire burning underneath the room of iron. And he began to think that the 6 men were not to be got rid of in that way. And he thought of a new plan by which it might be managed. So he sent for the leader and said to him, "If you will give up your right to my daughter and take gold instead, you may have as much as you like." "Certainly, my lord king," answered the man. "Let me have as much gold as my servant can carry, and I give up all claim to your daughter." And the king agreed that he should come again in a fortnight to fetch the gold. The man then called together all the tailors in the kingdom and set them to work to make a sack. And it took them a fortnight. And when it was ready, the strong man who had been found rooting up trees took it on his shoulder and went to the king. "Who is this immense fellow carrying on his shoulder a bundle of stuff as big as a house?" cried the king, terrified to think how much gold he would carry off. And a ton of gold was dragged in by 16 strong men. But he put it all into the sack with one hand, saying, "Why don't you bring some more? This hardly covers the bottom." So the king bade them fetch by degrees the whole of his treasure. And even then, the sack was not half full. "Bring more," cried the man. "These few scraps go no way at all." Then At last, 7,000 wagons, laden with gold, collected through the whole kingdom, were driven up, and he threw them in his sack, oxen and all. "I will not look too closely," said he, "but take what one can get, so long as the sack is full." And when all was put in, there was still plenty of room. "I must make an end of this," he said. "If it is not full, it is so much the easier to tie up." And he hoisted it on his back and went off with his comrades. When the king saw all the wealth of his realm carried off by a single man, he was full of wrath, and he bade his cavalry mount and follow after the 6 men and take the sack away from the strong man. 2 regiments were soon up to them and called them to consider themselves prisoners and to deliver up the sack or be cut in pieces. "Prisoners, say you," said the man who could blow. "Suppose you first have a little dance together in the air." And holding one nostril and blowing through the other, he sent the regiments flying head over heels, over the hills and far away. But a sergeant who had 9 wounds and was a brave fellow begged not to be put to so much shame. And the blower let him down easily, so that he came to no harm. And he bade him go to the king and tell him that whatever regiments he liked to send, more should be blown away just the same. And the king, when he got the message, said, "Let the fellows be. They have some right on their side." So the 6 comrades carried home their treasure, divided it among them, and lived contented till they died. The Wolf and the Fox. The wolf kept the fox as his unwilling servant, and whatsoever the wolf desired, the fox was forced to obey, for the wolf was the stronger, and the fox the weaker. Yet the fox's heart was never at ease, for he longed with all his cunning to rid himself of his harsh master. But the days passed, and still he remained bound to the wolf by fear. It happened one morning, as they trod a lonely path through the forest, that the wolf halted and fixed his fiery eyes upon the fox. "Red Fox," growled he, "procure me something to eat at once, or else I will tear thee in pieces and devour thee myself." The fox, trembling but swift of thought, bowed his head and answered, "I know of a farmyard not far hence where 2 young lambs are kept. If it pleases thee, we may fetch one without delay." The wolf's mouth watered at the thought, and he assented. Together they went to the place, moving like shadows among the trees, until they reached the fold. There, with stealth and nimbleness, the fox seized one tender lamb and bore it to his master. The wolf fell upon it greedily and devoured it to the bone. But gluttony is never satisfied. Soon he desired the second lamb as well. Alone, he crept back, but his paws stumbled and his teeth snapped too loudly. The ewe, mother of the lamb, raised a great cry and bleated so wildly that the farmer and his men rushed forth. They found the wolf and beat him without mercy, striking him with cudgels until his sides ached and his legs trembled. Limping and howling, he slunk away and sought the fox. "See how finely thou hast deceived me," he snarled. "I went for the other lamb, and the peasants surprised me. They have beaten me to a jelly." The fox, sly and untroubled, only curled his brush and said, "Why art thou ever such a glutton, master? Hadst thou been content, thou wouldst have come to no harm." The next day, hunger again gnawed at the wolf, though his sides still smarted. His greed was fiercer than his pain. As they wandered over the fields, he growled once more, "Red fox, get me something to eat, or I will eat thee thyself." The fox, who had little desire to be eaten, replied, "I know of a farmhouse where the goodwife is baking pancakes this very night. Soft and sweet they are, and easily taken. Let us fetch some for our supper." This plan pleased the wolf. They crept to the house, and the fox circled slyly round it, sniffing the air until he spied where the dish was set to cool. With nimble leaps, he drew down 6 golden pancakes, hot and fragrant, and carried them to the wolf. "Here is somewhat for thee to eat," said he, and then trotted off. The wolf swallowed the cakes in an instant, but their taste only sharpened his craving. "Such dainties make one long for more," cried he. And unable to restrain himself, he rushed clumsily to the dish and tore it down with such violence that it broke into shards. The crash brought the woman running, and when she beheld the wolf, she shrieked and summoned her household. They came with stout sticks and beat him until the wood splintered in their hands. Thus bruised and with 2 lame legs, the wolf dragged himself away, howling piteously, until he found the fox again in the forest. "How abominably thou hast betrayed me," he cried. "The peasants caught me once more, and they have tanned my hide for me." But the fox laughed in his whiskers and said, "Why art thou forever such a glutton, master? Hadst thou been content, no stick would have touched thy back." On the 3rd day, they ventured forth again. The wolf, sore and weary, limped beside the fox, yet hunger burned more fiercely than ever in his belly. At last he groaned, "Red fox, get me something to eat, or I will eat thee thyself." The fox, sly as ever, answered, "I know of a man who hath been slaughtering. His salted meat lies stored in a barrel within the cellar. There is abundance enough to fill thee to bursting. If thou art minded, we shall fetch it." Said the wolf, "I will go, but thou must go with me, that thou mayest help me if I cannot escape." The fox agreed, and led him through crooked bypaths and secret ways, until at length they came to the cellar. There, sure enough, the barrel was filled with salted meat, and the wolf's eyes gleamed. He leapt upon it at once, tearing and gulping as though he would never cease. "There is time enough yet," thought he, "before I need leave off." The fox licked a piece or two, but his cunning never slept. He ran again and again to the hole by which they had entered, slipping through it and back, testing if his body could still pass out freely. "Why dost thou run to and fro?" asked the wolf between mouthfuls. "Why leap in and out so restlessly?" "I must be watchful," answered the crafty one. "I must see that no one is coming. Do not overfill thy belly, master. Eat not too much." But the wolf only growled, "I shall not stir until the barrel is empty." Meanwhile, the farmer, who had heard the fox's scampering, came down the steps into the cellar. The fox spied him at once, and with one bound was through the hole and into the free air of the night. The wolf, however, had eaten so greedily that his belly was swollen. He tried to squeeze through the hole, but he stuck fast and could not move forward nor backward. The farmer seized a heavy cudgel, and with a furious blow struck the wolf upon the head. Again and again he beat him until the beast lay dead upon the floor. The fox, safe in the shadow of the forest, listened to the sound of the blows and smiled within himself. At last, he was rid of the old glutton and free from his cruel master. And so it befell that the wolf's greed brought him to his end, while the fox, by wit and watchfulness, saved his own skin. Gossip Wolf and the Fox. The Fox and his cousin. In a deep forest, where shadows stretched long and the moss muffled every step, a she-wolf brought forth a little son. Proud of her offspring and full of care for his future, she began to think of whom she might ask to stand as godfather. "It must be one of our own kin," said she to herself. "Someone clever, someone shrewd, someone who can guide my boy and teach him how to walk in this hard world." Her thoughts turned to the fox, who was cousin to her in the ways of beasts. "He is cunning, yes," she mused, "but he is also quick of wit and smooth of tongue. Perhaps his cleverness will be of use to my son, for the world does not always reward strength alone." So the she-wolf sought out the fox and said, "Cousin, born a child, and I would have you be his sponsor. After all, you are near of blood to us, and no creature in the forest possesses such understanding and talent as you. You can instruct my little son, guide him, and perhaps one day help him to prosper. The fox bowed his head, and his eyes gleamed, though he made them look humble. "Worthy Mistress Gossip," said he, "I thank you for the honor you are doing me. Be assured that I shall repay it with every kindness. I will not fail you or your child." Then he sat at the feast which the she-wolf prepared, and he ate with gusto, laughing and making merry until the dishes were bare and the jugs stood empty. When the feasting was done, the fox leaned close and said, "Dear Mistress Gossip, it is our duty to see that the child has good food, so that he may grow strong and thrive. Now, I know a sheepfold not far from here, and within are fat morsels that would nourish him well. Shall we fetch one?" The wolf, who trusted the smooth words of her chosen kinsman, pricked up her ears and wagged her tail. She was delighted with the plan and set out at once with the fox. He trotted lightly, guiding her by starlight, until they came within sight of the farmyard. Then the fox stopped and lifted his narrow snout. "There, cousin," he whispered. "See the fold. You are strong and swift, and you may creep in unseen. As for me, I shall go to the far side and look whether a careless chicken strays near the fence. Between us, we shall make a feast fit for the child." So said the fox, but slyness was ever in his heart. He did not go to the far side of the farmyard at all, but instead sat himself down at the entrance to the forest, stretched out his legs, and rested in comfort. Meanwhile, the she-wolf, eager to do her part, crept into the stable where the sheep lay. But a great dog was there, sharper of ear than she had reckoned. No sooner had she set paw upon the straw than he sprang up with a roar, and his barking rang out so loud that the farm awoke in an instant. Peasants came running, their lanterns flaring in the dark. They seized Mistress Wolf, and as punishment, they poured over her a burning mixture prepared for washing, so hot that her skin smarted and her fur smoked. With a howl of pain, she broke free at last and dragged herself outside, her body aching, her pride wounded. And there, not far off, lay the fox, feigning misery. He groaned and cried out, "Ah, dear Mistress Gossip, how ill I have fared. The peasants fell upon me, beat me cruelly, and broke every limb I had. If you do not wish me to lie here and perish, you must take pity and carry me upon your back." The she-wolf, though scorched and trembling, thought more of her crafty kinsman than of herself. Slowly, painfully, she stooped, lifted the fox onto her shoulders, and bore him away toward her den. Each step was torment to her, yet she murmured, courage, cousin. I shall save you, though I myself can scarcely walk." But when at last they reached her dwelling, the fox leapt lightly down, nimble as ever, his body unscathed. He laughed loud and long, and his eyes shone with malice. "Farewell, dear Mistress Gossip," he cried. "May the roasting you have had do you good. I, for my part, am sound and hearty." With that, he bounded away into the forest, his brush high, leaving the she-wolf bewildered and betrayed. And from that day forth, she remembered that the fox's tongue was silver, but his heart was false, and she warned her son that fair words are often snares, and that cunning may serve itself before it serves its kin. The Pink. Once, in a distant kingdom, there lived a queen to whom God had granted no children. Each morning, with a heart heavy with longing, she wandered into the royal garden. And there, beneath the dew-laden leaves and the open sky, she prayed earnestly to heaven. She begged that she might cradle in her arms a son or a daughter, a child of her own blood, to bring light into the palace halls. Day after day, she prayed with steadfast faith, until one morning, an angel descended from heaven, radiant and clothed in brightness. The angel spoke gently to her. "Be comforted, noble queen. Thy prayer has been heard. A son shall be given thee, and with him a wondrous gift, the power of wishing. Whatever in all the world he shall desire, it shall be his." The queen's heart overflowed with joy. She hastened to the king with this blessed news, and together they rejoiced in trembling expectation. When the appointed time arrived, the queen bore a son, strong and fair, and the king was filled with gladness beyond measure. As the boy grew, the queen took him each morning to the garden where the wild beasts were kept, and she washed herself in the clear stream that flowed there. One day, when the child had grown a little older, she sat with him, cradled in her arms, and lulled by the gentle murmur of the water, she fell into slumber. Then came the old royal cook, a man whose heart was black with envy and cunning. He knew of the child's wondrous gift, and greed stirred within him. Stealthily, he stole the boy away, but not before he slew a hen, sprinkled its blood upon the queen's apron and garments, and ran to the king with wicked accusation. He cried out that the queen had been careless and had let the wild beasts tear her child from her arms. When the king beheld the bloodstains, anger and sorrow seized him. In blind rage, he ordered a high tower to be built, one so desolate that neither sun nor moon could shine within. And into this prison he cast his wife. The walls were sealed, and there she was to remain 7 years, without food or drink, condemned to perish of hunger. Yet God, who is merciful, did not forsake her. From heaven descended 2 angels in the form of white doves, and each day, twice, they brought her food and drink, so that she was sustained until the 7 bitter years were ended. Meanwhile, the cook carried the boy to a hidden place where a nurse was forced to care for him. But fear gnawed at the cook's heart. If the child grows and learns his power, he may speak against me, and I shall surely meet my ruin. Therefore, he sought to ensnare the boy's gift for himself. When the child could speak, the cook whispered, "Wish for a palace with shining halls and gardens full of splendor." So, at once, before their very eyes, a magnificent palace arose, adorned with towers and wide courtyards, its gardens blooming with flowers no painter could capture. Not long after, the cook, still scheming, urged the boy to wish for a companion. "It is not fitting for thee to be alone," said he. "Wish for a maiden, fair and gentle, to share thy days." And the king's son, with innocent heart, wished as the cook advised. In that instant, a maiden appeared, so lovely that her beauty surpassed all earthly imagining. The boy and the maiden played together, and their hearts were bound in tender love. But the cook grew restless and afraid, for he feared the boy would one day long for his father and discover the truth. So he called the maiden aside and placed in her hand a sharp knife. "When the boy sleeps tonight," he whispered, "thrust this blade into his heart. Bring me his heart and his tongue, else thou shalt lose thy life." The maiden trembled with horror when the cook returned the next day and found his command undone. He threatened her again, but she could not lift her hand against the innocent child. Instead, she brought forth a little hind, had it slain, and laid its heart and tongue upon a dish. Then she warned the boy, saying, "Lie in thy bed and cover thyself well." When the cook came and demanded the proof, she gave him the plate. But the boy threw aside the covers and with stern voice said, "Thou wicked sinner, why soughtest thou my life? Hear now thy sentence. Thou shalt be changed into a black poodle with a golden collar, and thou shalt devour live coals until fire bursts from thy throat." No sooner had he spoken than the cook was transformed into a dog, and the collar of gold shone round his neck. The servants brought burning coals, which the creature was forced to swallow until flames leapt forth from his mouth. The boy remained a while in the splendid palace, but his thoughts turned ever toward his mother. he longed to know whether she still lived. He said to the maiden, "I will return to my country. Wilt thou come with me? If so, I shall provide for thee all thy days." The maiden hesitated. "The road is long, and in thy land I am but a stranger." Yet their love was too deep to sever. So the boy wished that she be transformed into a beautiful pink flower, which he carried with him in his bosom. The black poodle followed at his heels. When he reached the tower where his mother had been imprisoned, he wished for a ladder that reached to its very top. Climbing, he called through the small opening, "Dearest mother, Lady Queen, dost thou live still, or art thou dead?" She answered, thinking angels had come, "I have but now eaten, and am satisfied." Then the boy cried, "I am thy son, whom the cook stole, but I live, and I shall soon deliver thee." Descending, he went to the palace of his father. Disguised as a huntsman, he asked to serve the king. The king, though doubtful, accepted, saying deer had not been seen in his land for many years. But the boy gathered huntsmen, formed them in a wide circle, and wished. At once, 200 deer sprang into the ring, and the huntsmen slew them. 60 carts carried the game to the king, who marveled and rejoiced. The next day, a great feast was held. The king invited all the household and commanded the huntsman to sit beside him. The youth obeyed, though humbly. While he sat there, he wished that someone would speak of the queen in the tower. And suddenly, the marshal said, "We live in joy here, but how fares the queen in her lonely tower? Is she alive, or has she perished?" The king grew wrathful and declared she had let his son be devoured by beasts, and he forbade her name. Then the huntsman rose, saying, "Gracious Lord Father, I am thy son. Not beasts, but that vil cook stole me from my mother's arms and stained her apron with a hen's blood. Behold the dog with the golden collar. That is the villain himself." Before all eyes, the dog devoured live coals until flames burst forth. Then the son wished him back into his true shape. And there stood the guilty cook with his apron and knife. The king raged and cast him into the dungeon to be torn in pieces. Then the youth brought forth the pink flower, laid it upon the table, and wished it to become the maiden. She stood there in all her beauty, so radiant no painter could match her. The king marveled, and at last sent servants to bring the queen from her tower. She was pale and weak, yet her faith was unbroken. She ate nothing, saying, "The merciful God who sustained me shall soon deliver me." 3 days later, she died peacefully. And the 2 white doves that had fed her followed her to the grave. Grief weighed upon the aged king until he too died not long after. Then the son, now king himself, wedded the maiden who had once been a flower in his keeping, and whether they live still or not, only God in heaven knows.